Salome. We can have Salome Odero begin, even as we try to get Salome Oyugi to join. Thank you so much.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you so much, Nancy. And glad to be here this afternoon for this training on sexual harassment. And it is good that Nancy has already indicated to us on what we have covered in the other two sessions. And as we look forward to today's session on compliance to sexual harassment policy, I am also glad to be one of the moderators. My name is Newton Maina, and working at Human Resource Department in Kenyatta National Hospital. So welcome everyone.
Newton, you can continue and also introduce Karen and the speakers.
Yes, so thank you again, Nancy. And I will be co-moderating this session together with Dr. Karen. And Dr. Karen, and then the facilitator or the panelists for this session will be Salome Oyugi. Dr. Karen Nyangara is a director of the Institute of Gender Studies at Maseno University here in Kenya. And she's a gender and educational specialist with over 25 years of experience. And Karen spearheads the Gender Mainstreaming Committee at Maseno University, where she coordinates the efforts to handle sexual violence, workplace harassment, and inequitable practices. These are the topics that she's going to handle. And Dr. Karen has also worked with international and other national organizations to ensure that the policy and practice impact positively on transforming the lived experiences of men and women. And Dr. Karen is passionate about using technology to create a more equitable, just, and inclusive society. Her areas of interest in terms of research is with a focus on gender equity, governance, and inclusive education. So she's well versed with the topic of today, and therefore she will be very instrumental in helping us to also get something and take home from this section. And then I would also want to introduce our facilitator, who is from the Gender Committee of the LSK. Our facilitator is Salome Oyugi, who is an advocate, and currently she serves as the manager in charge of political parties. And Salome is widely experienced and has knowledge in terms of academics that is wide in terms of matters relating to elections, governance, and legal administration. We are specialized in governance and democracy, human rights, gender, and also international law. And it would also be important to tell us that Salome is also a member of ICJ and FIDA, and therefore the input on the topic that we have today, we know that we're going to have the very good input, and we're going to learn and have some take home on the matters of compliance to sexual harassment policy, and she's also going to take us through the safeguard against false complaints. So thank you. That is it for the introduction. And now we want to hand over to our facilitator. Salome, you can take it over.
Thank you, Newton. Hello?
Yes,
Hello.
we can hear you. We can hear you, Salome.
Thank you, Newton. Sorry for that delay. We had a bit of challenges with the network where I am. I'm happy to be here and to join this team. Mine today is to take us through the compliance with the sexual harassment policy and what are some of these safeguards that we must be alive to in terms of the frameworks and mechanisms and guidelines that we put in place, even as we mitigate against sexual harassment in the workplace. I do not have a presentation with me, forgive me, but I wanted to make it more of a discussion. But if there is need be, I can then share the presentation much later. But just as a way of introduction, as a way of introduction, we all do appreciate and embrace the fact that we are moving towards an era where sexual harassment has become quite rampant. And it is something that is not only locally recognized, but is also an international concern. And organizations are now moving forward to put in place systems, human rights systems that will inform and best manage this vice. As we speak to this, we must be able to ask ourselves as an organization, what mandate do we have as employers in the organization? What do we intend to do to take proactive steps to prevent this kind of discrimination in the workplace? We all appreciate it is an unwelcome conduct of sexual nature that is persistent and offensive. And in most cases, we have seen it interfere with an employee's job performance and sometimes bordering on hostilities and offensive work environment. We want to ask ourselves, what then does sexual harassment constitute? And it's time we even took cognizance of our existing social platforms, because we've seen a spillage of sexual harassment advances, whether it is pictures that people forward or messages or screenshots of very offensive information or visuals. And by that, we then acknowledge that it can be physical, verbal, psychological, to the extent that one is explicitly interfered with, even as they go along their day-to-day work processes. I want us to visualize at your working place how such conduct would impact on the employee, and the certain advances that are now becoming common, because as an employer, we then have to ask ourselves, how can we create and maintain a work environment that treats our staff with dignity, decency, and respect? And I believe that is why we are here today discussing, because there is a requirement from each and every one of us to put in place policies on sexual harassment in the workplace or in any other organization where we have different sexes coming together on a day-to-day basis and working very close to each other on a day-to-day basis. As organizations, we need to have a clear internal mechanism on how we deal with this. And the question that then arises is, where do we draw these guidelines? Where do we draw these procedures? And there's no clear-cut answer. What we have is reference to the existing laws, and it is then expected from each of us that by internalizing what the law constitutes as an offense around sexual harassment, and the responsibilities placed on us, both as employees and employers, then we must be able to put in place mechanisms. And when we talk of these mechanisms, I want to emphasize they must be built on trust, confidentiality. They must be non-retaliatory, which I will be speaking to much more as we move forward. And they must be an open process, inclusive, and one that is supportive of all cultures. And when I say supportive of all cultures, we must be sensitive to some of the cultural practice and religious practices that surround some of our colleagues. And what you may not consider as harassment would actually tantamount as harassment for some of us within our cultural confines. The message to us all is creating a culture of zero tolerance. Make it clear to our staff. How do we do this? What are our internal communication channels? Is it sufficient for us to train staff on the laws concerning sexual harassment and put in place penalties should someone be found to have been found accused or culpable? And even as these accusations are made, what are those safeguards? It is not enough for someone to come up and accuse a colleague, be it a junior or a senior, of sexual harassment, and we tend to take it as a word of mouth. A victim can be from either side of the coin, and so the mechanisms and the guidelines we put in place must speak to giving a fair hearing, even where an employee has been accused, giving unbiased approaches, and we must have a semblance of getting prior knowledge around this particular complaint before we meet any disciplinary measures. As supervisors or managers in this kind of environment, you must go beyond knowledge of the laws and the rules that govern sexual harassment. You must be seized with the capacity on how to handle these complaints. We do realize that within an organization setup, we may not have within us the required skills and competences to address issues around affording fair hearing to some of those complained of these acts, and also providing a conducive environment that will enable the victim to speak freely to you as a manager or a supervisor. And it then also requires us, therefore, to build our skills beyond this training that we are and this discussion that I want us to have vividly and openly. A lot of pressure is then put on our HR mechanisms, and you then want to think around, should a complainant bring themselves personally? Do you require them to put something in writing so that we can hold them to the accusations that they have put forth? Can we also be sensitive in as much as we put them to account to some of the information that they want to bring before us? It will require a victim to speak out names, positions, departments where necessary, and to describe in detail what has transpired. Normally in an organization, you do not want to restrict it to a purely adversarial process. We must be also able to give victims an opportunity to speak in a manner that makes them more comfortable. As we discuss that, we would also want to know what then are the steps, a step-to-step process that the organization or the individual who has been approached must do, even as we seek to subject the appropriate discipline or the appropriate remand. What duration do we want to take to address some of these issues? And if someone is harassed within that duration, what reprieve do you have for them? It is not enough to receive a complaint and inform the victim that the matter will be looked into. Remember, the same victim is still within the workplace and still facing the concerns that they may have raised to us. What are these safeguards then against false accusation? Now, irrespective of any concerns that an employee may have, we must always be sure that they are genuine allegations, so that you're able to even approach this allegation fairly and objectively. What would this involve? And what would it require to us as employers or supervisors? And that is why I say it goes beyond the skill of training and knowing what the law says about sexual harassment, because you then need to gather evidence, speak to the relevant witnesses. In most cases, we advocate for independent interviews so that you're able to give them the confidentiality that they require. But you must then go a next step to confirm that the information you have been given is a true reflection of whatever may have transpired, because even as we in most cases empathize with victims of sexual harassment, there are aspects that border on hostilities among employees and the urge to vindicate others with a view to satisfy certain egos or certain temperaments. And in so doing, we may want to consider then actual written statements as opposed to verbal. Most organizations are then moving towards that, so that it has been, the understanding here has been, when a victim is required to put it in writing, it gives a semblance of ownership and responsibility. And at that point, if there was an ill intention, you will find that most people at a stage where then they withdraw, either because it was not done with the right motive, or by their own doing, they feel they may have misunderstood a certain situation. And we then want to keep the documented records of any grievance that may have been brought against an employer or a supervisor for that nature, such that it then becomes the basis of any defense that one may want to raise in the event that you are accused of advancing issues around sexual harassment that were not valid. We start always at a point of asking ourselves, as we put in place these mechanisms, how then can we best describe sexual harassment? Must it be persistent? Even as we know it's a sexual advance, there's been argument that there must be a proof of persistence. Requests for sexual favors, whether verbal, visual, or physical. And submission to such conduct would either be a term or a condition for the individual to remain working at that particular institution. Now, the laws that prohibit sexual harassment in Kenya are vast. We may want to look at the Constitution as a start, and at this juncture, then Articles 27 and 29 become the platform by which we are able to put in place our necessary policies. We also have the Sexual Offences Act, number 3 of 2016, that puts in place, it actually speaks to what constitutes sexual harassment, the offenses inherent, and through that we can be able to put in place the remedies that we require and what we consider as most appropriate as we mete out some of these disciplinary measures. We also need to look at the Employment Act of 2007, which clearly makes this sexual harassment an offense that is punishable under law. The Health Hazard Act has also singled that out as an aspect of hazardous practices in the workplace. As institutions research around sexual harassment, I think as an institution ourselves, it is something that we have tried to draft and redraft, because as we move forward each and every other day, this nature of advances vary. As I did mention, given the uptake of social platforms by citizens. International conventions then become useful. we do appreciate Article 2 of our Constitution that binds us, that gives us the leverage to bind on some of these conventions. And from that, you're able now to draw aspects on what you should first do as a victim and what the organization should do in terms of addressing some of these complaints. By mention just a few, the UN Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination, the International Labour Organization Discrimination Convention, Protocol on African Charter and Human Rights, which is very key and central to us as an organization. We also, in most cases, as we know, sexual harassment happens mostly to women. So the rights of women in Africa and the conventions around that, some of which border also on the education system, then become important in informing how we manage sexual harassment at the workplace. Not to belabor on what I have mentioned earlier, while they border on physical and verbal, let's also not forget issues around solicitation of sexual activity for purposes of reward. We have seen in organizations where persons find themselves soliciting with sexual acts so that they get certain favors, promotions, and project trips, and it is something that we should now also consider as an aspect of sexual harassment, because it should not be, that should not be the case. What should you do if you're sexually harassed as an employee within an organization? Acquaint yourself with a sexual harassment policy, and that is why it is important as an organization for each and every one of us to put in place those policies. And they can vary based on the nature of services we offer or the mandates of the particular organizations. Talk to a person or people involved within your sector, within your profession. Report and raise complaints. And I raise profession because sometimes for a victim, it becomes difficult to raise a complaint internally. And so you may seek some support from professional organizations within your sector that can assist you to advance your complaint. Those who witness must also be encouraged to report such incidences without fear or retaliation. And when we speak to that open environment, it puts a lot of pressure on our human resource departments to create those structures that allow for timely processes and give you that safeguard of confidentiality so that you're not victimized as someone who has raised this complaint. In some cases, it may warrant pursuing investigations even without a formal complaint. And this should be encouraged as much as possible, even as we tell employees that it is paramount that cases are reported immediately, and we as employers then promptly address these allegations. Where would a victim file their complaint? Like I mentioned earlier, you may as an organization want to develop a complaint form. You may want to make it an anonymous process, but we encourage transparency in this process. And then you would be asking a victim to fill in that complaint form, make it available even electronically, sometimes to safeguard the victim from the victimization that is always in their mind as they make the bold step to make such a complaint. HR will feature everywhere because the HR knows the designation of the staff. They know whom they report to. And so even as a complaint is made, there must be direct channels to your human resource department, even in as much as we have done in certain organizations, put up specific units to deal with sexual harassment. it is important that we are able to find that linkage with our human resource departments. What then happens? The involved party should be notified in writing of the complaint, and they must be given a fair trial. We will do the investigations where it is necessary, even as we bring the charges before the accused person. And it is only upon conclusion of these investigations that you then want to refer it to that unit or that disciplinary committee, if you may have established one. And just as a caution, even as we establish our units or our disciplinary committees, we advocate for diversity. The committee must reflect diversity in gender, religion, and ethnicity, as these are the various categories that have an impact in the workplace, and put in place guidelines that speak to hearings, evidence where applicable, timely decision making, and even as the committee addresses, there must be reference to existing policy sanctions within your policy that can run from interim suspensions to full suspensions to interdictions. But even within that process, safeguards also kick in, because then an accused person should be able to have their right to appeal. And ask yourself, what then should be the period for this appeal? Is 5 sufficient? Is 7 sufficient? How then do they engage in these appellate processes? And which committee then sits to hear this appeal? Does it go back to the same committee, or do we have different appellate processes within the organization or the institution that would want to engage in this particular process? That said and done, as I indicated, I wanted this to be a bit more of discussions, because like I did mention, there are various forms of sexual harassment, and even as we develop our policies, we want them to be as broad as possible in terms of capturing anything that may border on sexual harassment. What do we want to put in place in terms of monitoring and evaluating compliance to these policies? It's one thing to put in place a policy and sit back and wait for complaints. The fact that a complaint is not made may not necessarily confirm that these acts do not happen within the workplace. And so within our policies, we want to see some form of monitoring to see how effective the policy is. How do we model appropriate standards of professional behavior within our organizations? What is our role to prevent this from happening, to create awareness and to manage sexual harassment as a whole? I think I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Salome. Thank you for that valuable presentation. And I think that members, we will have this Q&A session, so you can keep your questions coming in. And yes, and so that we are able to get responses on the same. Dr. Karen, you want to take it over and say something?
Thank you very much, Kinuthia. I think right now we haven't got any questions, but maybe I would like to, first of all, thank Salome for that presentation. And then I would like to just maybe refer to one of the things that she said and maybe ask a question around that maybe others could then take up. We have issues that surround the reporting, investigation, and then once a decision has been made, maybe an appeal that has come from the person who was the perpetrator. I would just like to ask, are there any guidelines on what is ideal in terms of the period for filing and for investigations?
Thank you for that question. Like I did mention, when we develop sexual harassment policies, it behooves upon us to look at all the laws that govern this. And I did speak to a few of them, and you will realize that they do not give specific guidelines on timeframes and period. But it borders on an organization. But from a legal perspective, best practice, we work with 7 to 14 days. And on issues of sexual harassment, concerns have been raised on the duration, much of the duration that we take in addressing these issues, because then you may give time for more adverse happenings to materialize. What I would suggest, a complainant is free to complain at any given time, but then as the person receiving the complaint, you then should have a time frame within which to address this complaint and call for that open hearing or call to hear evidence of the accused. A period of 5 days would be sufficient, and maybe 7 where you have to conduct investigations. Because like I mentioned, you want to ensure that these grievances contain an element of truth. Some complaints may be exaggerated, and only a good investigation can be used to identify the actual position, because then you keep fully documented records on anything that you may have heard from anyone or any witness who may have come up. So 5 to 7 days would be sufficient. And you then don't take long to mete out the disciplinary measure that you then feel is appropriate. Remember, it's more of an organizational tribunal that also seeks to uphold the aspects of fair access, fair administrative justice, and fair trial. So if, of course, after the complaint, after investigation, you find the complaint unfounded, then the accused individual may find themselves also raising a counter grievance, which would then also need to be investigated. So there's no clear-cut process on how this goes around, because it depends on the nature of the case. But an appellate process, in my view, should not take more than 5 days. You then give the accused time to appeal. They also need time to prepare, and equally on their end gather the required evidence, or even get witnesses of their own who can corroborate their story and confirm a true reflection of what they deem as appropriate information to advance their cause.
Thank you very much for that answer. I can see that we do not have any other questions in the chat. I would like to encourage participants to type their questions so that they can be answered, or to state them live in this time before John takes back over.
Okay, maybe Karen, we have some questions from the Q&A.
Yes.
That Q&A, we have some questions posted there. So
the Q&A.
The Q&A.
Yes, thank you. I can see the Q&A, but I would like to say that perhaps the questions that have been posted are on CPD tokens and CPD points, and perhaps that might be a little bit of outside of our discussion currently.
Okay, there's one I'm seeing, yeah? From Daniel Mwaura, who is asking whether complimenting someone on their dressing or physique amount to harassment, maybe we could combine it with another question down there. It is asking whether dressing can be part of sexual harassment.
Okay, thank you. I do not seem to have the same questions that you have. Okay, we will have to coordinate between us to get the questions because I do not have those questions on my Q&A.
That's okay.
Yes.
Can I proceed and answer that?
Yes, please.
Like I did mention, it depends on the manner. And you may compliment someone and you then faced with how they take it and what your intention was. And that is why our sexual harassment disciplinary units or committees become useful, because you must be empowered with the skill to actually identify what was the innuendo behind this. And it then also marries with the argument that each person must be afforded the opportunity to speak, so that we are able then to discern, is it an inappropriate advance? Did it have obscene sexual gestures? But it mainly borders on what we call gender harassment. And this is mainly around generalized sexist statements. And you then have to ask yourself if it's in your statement, it conveyed some kind of insult or degrading on the particular employee. You may have said it in an offensive way, even obscene jokes. While you may think it's humor, gender harassment does not visualize it that way, because if it's not said in a professional way, and it then borders on sexual coercion or such like behavior, then we want to believe that there was an sexual innuendo in that particular statement. The idea is to identify what is a disparaging remark about one's gender or physical appearance. If I tell you, I like the way you're dressed today, I don't think that carries a sexual innuendo. But obscenity then comes in where you find a lady with a short dress or a tight dress. They will always border on sexually suggestive innuendos, and that by itself becomes an offense. And like I said, the Sexual Harassment Act is very clear on some of these actions that can be purely considered as unwanted sexual innuendos. So as we sit as committees, we must be able to read through this. And that is why the sexual policy must be explicit. What would be normal in a certain workplace may not appear the same. What may be considered indecent exposure in a certain workplace, given the nature of work that goes on there, may vary in a different environment. And so as we put our policies, we must broaden our mind in terms of the work we do and our exposure for that matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Salome, for that answer. I think that was comprehensive enough. And I like the one word that you used, whether this is a wanted or is it an unwelcome comment, or is it an unwelcome gesture? And I think that would help us also to put into the context of sexual harassment. If I do not welcome a gesture or I do not welcome a comment, then that starts to border on harassment. Yes. There has been another question that has been asked that I would like you to address, and that is, what is it that one would be able to do in a place where, sorry, let me just read the exact question. Is there a place where the accused can sue for defamation where the allegations are found to be false?
Thank you for that question. Like I did indicate earlier, where investigations, in most cases, where investigations then indicate that this was a false accusation, you have this process starting all over, in the sense that the accused person can then raise their own grievance, indeed on those matters of defamation. You may want to have within your workplace that committee. It may be the same committee, because this is a related matter, where you then, by some way of appellate process, you then you put in your counter complaint, in the sense that I have been falsely accused, and therein also lie other penalties that can then be meted on the accuser. But in certain instances where the organization does not have the manpower to address all these processes, nothing stops an accused from going outside of the organization's structures. And that is where we see the Employment Act kicking in. But it is advisable that even as we put in place our structures on sexual harassment, we have various units. It need not be one unit. Various units that are able to handle just not only complaints, but counter complaints. But ideally, this kind of defamation accusation can also squarely fit with your HR unit. I'm sure even within our human resource policies, we are then able to put in place penalties to safeguard persons within the organization from false accusations and rumors that touch on their integrity and their person. It can be the same committee, it can be a different committee, or you may want to entrench it within your human resource disciplinary processes.
Thank you very much for that comprehensive question. I'm not sure if there is any other question before we move on.
There is one asking the content or the details that would be in a sexual harassment complaint form.
Salome, would you like to take that question from Newton about what would be in a sexual harassment complaint form?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. First of all, complaints, it's always advisable that complaints are submitted as soon as possible after an incident has occurred. And yes, indeed, preferably in writing. In some occasions, we have even the HR unit assisting the complainant in completing just a purely written statement. But there are those who have gone a step further and developed a complaint form to ensure that at any given time, whoever downloads a complaint form is able to provide the information needed. You would then want to put your name down, the name, the department and position of the person allegedly committing the harassment, a description of the incident. This will always include the date, the location. You may also want to indicate the presence of any witnesses by name, by department, the effect of the incident on your ability to perform your job or any other terms or conditions of your employment, the names of other individuals who might have been subject to the same or similar harassment, because this is actually something that happens quite a lot. Any steps you may have taken as a complainant to try and stop the harassment is also necessary. And basically any other information that you as an individual will believe to be relevant to the harassment complaint. But the 5 issues I've mentioned the basic components of a complaint form that must be filled before the respective unit then considers it appropriate to receive and adjudicate over. Thank you. Any other issue?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that reply. And I also want to add that organizations can develop their own complaints form because it is an internal document and therefore may not be standardized, but has to do with exactly what kind of employees and employers that they are dealing with. For example, at Maseno University, we deal mainly with students and with staff. And so our complaints form is modeled to show, is it student to student, is it student to staff, or is it staff to student? And so every organization can develop one that is customized to what their needs are. Thank you very much, Salome. I want to see whether there are any. Yes, there are no more questions. Maybe we can go back to John.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you.
Hello, back to the host.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Karen. And it's good. There is final one I'm seeing here. Maybe we could answer it before we proceed. Asking cases of sexual harassment, how do you get evidence when investigating the reported case? Maybe we could answer that as well.
Newton, are you directing that to me or to Salome?
It tends to the Q&A section, so maybe Salome can answer before we proceed to the other section.
Okay.
Yeah.
The question was, how do you conduct investigations?
Yes, that's
How
the
do you
question.
gather evidence?
Well, it begins with the question of whether the complainant has indicated any witnesses to that particular action. It would then require you to sit with the witnesses, get the information required from them, and in most cases, you want it in writing so that that witness can also put their signature to it. Remember, we don't want to perpetrate false accusations. Also, depending on the nature of accusation, some organizations, like the one I work with, have the benefit of having investigators within the organization, or an compliance and audit unit within an organization who have inbuilt professional mechanisms where they are able to sit with staff, chat. I'm using the word chat because you will not be directly interviewing somebody. You will be gathering information just by way of side chats, by way of observation. Where situations are dire, you find yourself then also interviewing to some extent the accused, not directly, but by asking, for lack of a better word, leading questions with the hindsight that there's certain information you're looking for that they may be able to say or give out for that matter. But it is advisable that investigations are done confidentially. Sometimes you even request the complainant to share with you any documents, telephone conversations, Snapchats, anything that may have been advanced towards them. Remember, you're not only collecting information, but you're also gathering reports and evidence. that can then be tabled. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Salome. As you are speaking, there are two more questions that have come up. One is from Emma Mutio, who is asking, is there a range of harassment scenarios, or is it a one or none scenario when looking at sexual offenses? And the other question is whether KNH has a committee on gender, a committee, and how sensitization on sexual harassment is conducted.
If I got the first question right, the argument has always been, must we be able to prove that this was persistent? And the reason we argue for persistent is because, like I did allude to earlier, you may make an innocent gesture and it may be misunderstood, and you don't ever repeat it. Now, persistent, when persistent kicks in, it now borders on sexual harassment. As long as it is persistent, it becomes demeaning, it becomes disparaging, and that is sufficient enough for someone to raise that actual complaint. But that also does not stop us from someone raising a complaint where even a one-off action was so serious and in a sexually suggestive manner. We must also be able to protect our employees because even one incident is likely to affect an employee 100%. So the nature and the complexity, the degree of that suggestive approach can also warrant. Of course, that is why we have in place the committee that now sits to assess the evidence and the information brought to them. It may be one-off on this particular victim, but it has happened severally to others. So it is not always advisable to just ignore and wait for it to be persistent. But again, just to affirm, anything that is persistent is something that automatically qualifies to be brought on board as a complaint. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your great answers. I think we can go back to the host now. The questions, I think we have answered most of them.
Yes, I can answer the question about from Jerry Gaido about whether we have such a committee in KNH and whether the activities that are happening. And I want to say that having these sessions by LSK is part of the sensitization that has been organized. Yes, there is a committee that is working to develop a policy, and we reached out to the gender committee of the LSK to come and also educate us and also help us to develop a policy. So the process of developing a policy is ongoing. And in the process, we also wanted to get information so that even ourselves, we can be educated and also to get material that we can use for subsequent sensitization. We have also conducted a survey within the hospital to try and better understand what is happening. And that is almost coming to an end. There is also another committee which is also doing work on, that is working on gender mainstreaming. And those activities will be rolling out in the course of this year. Newton, when you is moderating this session, is a member of that committee. That's how he has ended up being in this session, chairing this session. He's part of that committee that is working on gender mainstreaming, and the activities will be continuing in the course of the year. The materials that, all the lessons that you have learned, we are also having them available in our website, so that even when somebody missed a session, they can still come and learn. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Newton, I think the session goes back to you. Newton or Nancy, you want to finalize? Yeah.
Yes, thank you so very much for your presentation, Salome Oyigi. I'd like to give a chance to Salome Odero. Maybe you can give us some comments before we close this session.
Hello, thank you so much. I think Salome, my colleague and my senior has answered most of the questions. And her presentation has really been, it has given a definite overview about sexual harassment. And it's good to note that KNH is making strides in ensuring that it has in place policies and mechanisms to address sexual harassment within the institution. So for me, basically, I can't add much because she has answered most of it, and most of the questions she has aptly answered. So thank you so much for having me as well.
Thank you so much, Salome. Maybe just to give also a parting shot, maybe Salome or Yugi, you can give us your parting shot. What you think we need to know as KNH, even as we are in the process of finalizing the policy and rolling it out within KNH.
Thank you so much. What I would like to at least emphasize, let's be familiar with the laws that prohibit sexual harassment, because any policy that we develop must be properly leveraged with the specific provisions that govern the same. We need to be aware on what sexual harassment is. As I indicated, it borders on a number of things that may either be physical, verbal. I mentioned also emerging practices like sexual bribery, that is soliciting with sex for favors or for promotions and the like. It is basically a persistent and welcome sexual advance, request for sexual favors by a person in a position of authority. That is the underlying issue, position of authority, and submission to such conduct is made either explicitly or implicitly, affects your terms and conditions of the workplace. Let's have this basic issues in our fingertips, because what we are trying to ensure is that we have a safe work environment. We mitigate against hostile intimidation, humiliating intimidation, and offensive approaches. They can also be academic, like has been mentioned. Even as we develop our policies, it is largely informed by the nature of the institution and the nature of work that we do in our various institutions. It is unlawful, not only during the hours within the office space, but can be related in context to time spent out of the office. You could be at home and the innuendos continue. You could be in a conference, work function, trip, even office parties. All this happens, and it is not restricted to the workplace. It's important we put these policies in place, and we provide the right mechanisms for addressing and giving reprieve to victims. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Salome Oyugi. We have come to the end of our session, but unless Newton, you have something else to add?
Thank you, Dr. Nancy. Just to also appreciate you for stepping in and helping us in the moderation of the same. We're grateful, and I hope we will do even a better job as to what Dr. Kinulia says we are working on in terms of the policy, that we will look out to fill in the gaps that we may have. I think keep making that document a better one, so that it not only becomes a document on paper, but that it also works for us and helps us to curb these values. So thank you so much for my end. Thank you, Dr. Nancy.
Thank you so much to everyone who's attended this session. Just a few housekeeping and reminders. On Friday, we will have a webinar on COVID vaccination, considerations during pregnancy and breastfeeding. This is really, really key right now that we are vamping up our vaccination strategies, and it's been opened to the entire public. So we want to have these discussions. So should someone who's pregnant or someone who's breastfeeding, should they vaccinate? Does it put their children into any side effects or any dangers? And let's all come and hear from our experts about pregnancy and breastfeeding together with COVID vaccination, and answer those questions that we've had. Secondly, we'll also be having an international conference of health. This will be done in conjunction with the University of Nairobi, the College of Health Sciences. This will be our 5th international conference, and it will be held from 27th to 29th October 2021. And right now, we are calling for papers for anyone who wants to disseminate their research on healthcare and innovation, especially during this pandemic. Please submit your papers so that we can be able to disseminate far and wide about what we are doing, and mark that date so that during that time you'll be able to attend the conference for 27th to 29th. Additionally, we have the 7th All Africa Congress on Basic and Clinical Pharmacology. So the 7th ACP 2021, and this will be held 15th to 17th of September 2021. And here we want to see how to drive research in pharmacology. So how to be innovative in our pharmacology practices. So we are accepting abstracts, and the abstract submission deadline is on the 20th. You can still submit your abstracts. If you want to attend this conference, please register early. Registration is up until 12th September 2021. Don't miss this very, very good conference that's coming up. Otherwise, to all our panelists and attendees, thank you so much for attending our session. Thank you so much for being, for listening in our training series, where we began with identification of sexual harassment to how do we report them, and then how do we ensure compliance in our policies. Thank you so much to the medical research team for organizing this. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maureen.
What is the problem with your friend?
Which friend?
Correct. He wants to end the meeting from the very beginning.
Look, you're the one who found her.
Oh.